because I've got a lot of those snips here. I'll talk about this last question here. Kyle, this is a big question. I'll give you the quick answer because we're going to be a little limited on time. Leverage is misused a lot in DFS. It is often just said to be, fading the chalk or something like that, right? Is leverage. I think about leverage in two ways. One is the field imperfectly. Let me think about the right way to say this. The field imperfectly using a particular player or lineup construction or lineup or something in it compared to that players or lineups or lineup constructions win outcome, right? So I mentioned it here at the start of the show. Let's say, for example, on 9-game slates, 5 stacks on DK win 20% of the time, right? If the field only builds 5 stacks 10% of the time, then there is leverage on rostering 5 stacks, right? Because we have this data, this past data that says these stacks win this often. The field is under on that. You have a gained relative advantage on the field by rostering or building a lineup with that kind of lineup construction, right? The field has imperfectly handled that particular market, right? And you can do it on the player level too, right? So we have Freddie Peralta here as our highest expected pitcher, right? At 51% owned tonight. If he comes in at 51% owned, the field is basically making a statement that Freddie Peralta is one of the top 2 pitchers on the slate 51% of the time, right? That would be perfect ownership. If the real outcome there happened less than half of the time, there would be leverage on being under the field or fading that player. If the actual outcome happened more than 51% of the time, there would be leverage on being over-owned on that player. The other way of thinking about leverage here, and I don't know, I don't know if one of these is more correct, but I see the term used in these 2 different ways that I think are both kind of correct. The other way of thinking about leverage is gaining relative advantage on the field by taking advantage of, by using players or building a lineup that stands to gain when a popular construction loses, right? So the most conventional way of thinking about that would be, rather than actually just like fading Peralta, it'd be stacking the Cubs, right? When Peralta's fail condition in this slate is the Cubs lighting him up, right? Building a lineup of a Cub stack has leverage on the field because it is a lineup construction that stands to gain when Peralta fails, right? If you fade Peralta and you build lineups without him and then he fails, you're going, as your pitcher score, you're going to beat those lineups in the contest. If you fade Peralta and play Cubs and he fails, your lineup is going to catapult up the rankings because you have that form of leverage on the field, right? And this works, again, this is kind of where, this is why I said I'll try to keep it short. This also works from like a lineup construction standpoint too, right? So you can see the lineup construction right now that the slate looks like it is going to have at pitcher is going to be a ton of Peralta and Bauer and probably some Giolito. We have Maeda as like one option for salary relief here, but it seems like a very popular construction is going to be playing 2 aces up top. So that would lead towards lineups constructed that have cheaper stacks. So if we look at like value stacks, we see any teams popping up here multiple times, maybe Detroit, right? A few times here. What's their 4.6 runs, right? The lineup construction that stands to be popular tonight is 2 aces up top and cheaper stacks. So reversing that is going to give you leverage on the field because the field is maybe improperly looking at the actual win percentage of lineups that are built with expensive stacks and cheaper pitchers, right? So I guess maybe those are two of the exact same definitions. They feel different in my head, but leverage is really the field imperfectly, right? The DFS, any DFS slate is basically a market, is the field imperfectly assessing the win outcomes of the market, and being on the opposite side of that gives you leverage. So, yeah, great question though. I feel like maybe there's probably a strategy session here talking about leverage at some point. I think it's an interesting concept. I don't feel like it is well described a lot of times in the DFS industry and in the content out there. A 50% owned player, right? Like Peralta, there can be leverage on owning that player more than the field. Peralta's not the greatest example, right? Because from my perspective, this is probably not the best chalk. But like somebody like DeGrom, right? Like we've seen slates where he's the only ace there. I know he didn't have his best outing last time he was on the mound, but there's slates where he's like the only ace or the only real good pitcher up there, and he comes in like 60% owned. If his likelihood of being one of the top two pitchers is higher than 60%, right? There's leverage on over owning him compared to the field, right? The field is still imperfectly assessing his ceiling, even though he's the highest owned pitcher on the slate. So leverage is not just fading the chalk. Leverage is finding the market inefficiency and betting the other side of it, being on the other side of it in your lineup construction. So, but I would be happy to talk about that more, or if there's like specific slate specific questions or sport specific questions or anything like